Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming to the class tonight. I want to share a little bit about a really powerful attribute of God that affects each one of us, and it has some richness behind it in the Hebrew language that I want to kind of share. Let me start with a little bit of an introduction. There have been some babies that have been born recently. I wasn't able to get like recent maternity pics, except for one. Brother Ben's sister apparently just recently posted, Dan and Dassy, who are actually in Stoughton not too long ago. What did I do? I broke it. Oh, hold on one second. Nope. Everything's broken. That's not good. Let's try this again. So anyway, Dan and Dassy just recently, I think yesterday, posted a picture, and because Dassy's expecting very soon. But this is an old picture of Kara. I think she was pregnant with Joel at this time that I managed to dig out. And just another person that none of us know that is just very pregnant. To get you thinking about the following. So mothers that are in the audience, think back to when you were pregnant. Other women and men, this is going to be a little harder for us men, especially. Try to imagine what it must be like to be pregnant, or remember what it was like to be pregnant. There's a small child growing and developing inside your womb. You have to start thinking differently about what you eat and drink, knowing that you're eating for two, because this young life is now inside of you, cradled in this protective environment, nurtured, loved, supplied with the oxygen, the food, the nutrients it needs for life and growth. And there's this special bond that's forming even before the child is born between you and the child. And that bond, of course, continues to grow after birth. Now, I do have some recent pictures of the newborns of Nora and Clara here. So now after they're born, now you can see that young life that was hidden from view for so long, for 9 months. And now they're totally dependent upon you for survival. You feed them, you change them, you clean them, you care for them. You hold them gently and rock them when they cry. You protect them and you love them dearly. You have compassion for this fragile, vulnerable child. I want you to keep that image in mind, and we'll see that it's actually very well connected to the idea of what compassion is. And so thank you, Jim, for reading from Exodus 34. God revealing the attributes of his character. And each of these attributes deserve not just like a whole series of Bible school classes, but a lifetime of study and reflection. These attributes of God, that he's the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in loyal love and faithfulness, keeping loyal love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. But he by no means leaves the guilty unpunished, responding to the transgression of the fathers by dealing with the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. So among those attributes, those really, really important attributes of God that he revealed to Moses, the very first is the compassionate God. The compassionate God. In the context, just considering, with the build up to this event, Moses was asking God, if you're pleased with me, teach me your ways so that I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people. Moses was seeking to be taught by God about God's ways. And what was revealed to him reflects, God's glory, God's character reflects his ways. And that's what Moses wanted to be taught. Moses said, "Show me your glory." Isn't it interesting that God's glory, he could have, had a hurricane come through. He could have had lightning and thunder. He could have had all kinds of things, but he chose to show his glory through those attributes. And those attributes. And he said, the Lord said, "I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you." And thanks. And I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I'll have mercy. I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. He's highlighting actually those first two characteristics, only instead of adjectives in verbal form. And he said, "But you can't see my face, for no one may see my face and live." Then the Lord said, "There's a place near me where you may stand on a rock. Then when my glory passes by, I will put you in the cleft of the rock and cover you with my hand until I've passed by. Then I will remove my hand and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen." So that's kind of a little bit of the context of God's revelation, his proclamation of his character, of his glory in those attributes. And as we said, he leads off with compassion. So, what is compassion? We think of the English word, it comes from the cum part prefix means with, and pati means to bear or to suffer. So literally it means suffering with another, a sensation of sorrow, excited by distress or misfortunes of another, pity, commiseration, according to Webster. And in dictionary.com, it says a feeling of deep sympathy and sorrow for another who's stricken by misfortune, accompanied by a strong desire to alleviate the suffering. Just a really, really powerful thing, compassion. And it's so important as an attribute of God that God, begins with it. And the Jews recognized just how important that aspect of God was. A favorite name for God in the Talmud was Rahmana, the compassionate one, that comes from that same word, compassionate, Rahum in Exodus 34:6. And it's not just the Talmud, which actually gives a name for God or a title for God, describing him as the compassionate one. We could look in the scriptures. There's a couple places in the scriptures, one of which is Isaiah 54, verse 10, which says, "For the mountains may depart, the hills may be removed, but my steadfast love shall not depart from you, and my covenant of peace shall not be removed, says the Lord, who has compassion on you." That last line literally says, "The one who has compassion on you, Yahweh." And that whole part that I've underlined, "the one who has compassion on you," is one word in Hebrew. It's a participle. So it's like a noun describing God, coming from a verb. And that's kind of awkward to say, all those things. So it's, but if I was thinking, just brainstorming, okay, if I could put a name, condense that into a one word, how would I do it? I came up with the Compassionator. God is, the one who shows compassion, but, it sounds a little, I don't know, weird. So I guess that's not going to probably catch on, obviously, as a name, but God is the one who gives compassion. We could use that as a title for God. I mean, we have titles for God that we have, like the Lord of Hosts, and I've shared with Brother Jim, another participle describing God as, the Lord your healer. God is our healer. That's a powerful thing. It's like we could make this list of titles of God, and I think we would actually find that there's actually quite a few beyond the ones we normally think of, like, the Lord of Hosts or El Shaddai and those kinds of things. Add to that list the one who has compassion on you. Well, this word in Exodus 34 was rachum, comes from a verb which this participle is taken from as well. The root verb is the word racham, but everywhere in the scriptures except for one time, it's actually in a more intensive form. We put it in the construct, what's called the PL construct, which is a more intensive form. So it's richam, or in 99.99% of the passages. And so I put up just how does some common versions like translate richam, the verb, and to have mercy was the dominant one in the King James, and a number of us use the King James as our primary Bible, so it's I want you to see kind of how it's translated there in the dominant ways. But also the modern versions, I think, have rightly shifted the weight more towards compassion. So ESV has almost half the time to show compassion on, and the NIV and the NASB actually go with closer to 3/4 of the time to have compassion or show compassion on. And I think that's the dominant meaning of the word. To have mercy captures part of the meaning. When we have compassion, showing mercy is one aspect of that, but it's a much richer thing than just that. Lexicon, looking at the theological word book of the Old Testament, it says that richem it refers to a deep love, usually of a superior for an inferior. It's rooted in some natural bond, and it's used for the deep inward feeling that we know variously as compassion, pity, mercy. It's also worth noting that 80% of the time in the Bible, this word is referring to God. God is the compassionator, the one who has compassion. So just with that as a background. Now, back to the pie charts for a minute. In the King James pie there, the little yellow sliver there, lo ruhama, in Hebrew, lo ruhama. Does anybody know what that is?
Where you want to be, honey?
Bob, can you help us? Lo ruhama, do you know where that's from?
Uncle Bob, you're accidentally off of mute.
What's that, Leah? Without? It does mean without compassion. The lo, my daughter said, does it mean without compassion? The lo in the front is like a negative. It means not, or without, or no. And you can see in the second part, after the lo, the ruhama, there's that root, the RHM letters. All Hebrew words are usually, almost always, based on a 3-letter root. And you can see that root in there. Well, it comes from the story of Hosea. And less importantly, my personal history exploring this word actually starts in the book of Hosea. Back as a teen, before more importantly, Hosea, the story, the prophet, lived an enacted parable, and he takes a prostitute for a wife, according to the command of God, which was a symbol of Israel's unfaithfulness. It says in chapter 1, verse 2, when the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, "Go, take for yourself an adulterous wife and children of unfaithfulness, because the land is guilty of the vilest adultery in departing from the Lord." So he married Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. So talk about a tough job to have to take on. That's what the heartbreak that Hosea had to go through, because his wife did not remain faithful to him. She went off and chased other lovers and broke his heart, I'm sure. But in verse 1, before she left, they had 3 children, these three children with strange names: Jezreel, Lo Ruhamah, and Lo Ami. So back when I was a preteen, I guess I had a King James Bible given to me as an elementary student, and these weird names were there. And I actually looked in it. I still have that King James Bible, and it, Lo Ami had a little footnote, not my people, but there was no note for Lo Ruhamah. The story continues. As a teenager, I got myself an RSV to try to help me understand in modern English a little bit better the Bible, and those names were translated. And we had in my Bible then, it was Jezreel, not pitied, and not my people. So that, when translators come across a name in the Bible, they have a tough decision, because the name often in Hebrew carries meanings. And I found that fascinating as a young person, and continue to find it interesting to kind of see the meanings and the play on words that are so often there, and place names and people names. So what a horrible name to get. I mean, imagine you're a kid and you're named Not Pitied or Not My People. Not really the luckiest name to get. I think you get some pretty bad razzing in school from your schoolmates when that's your name. And they're like, I'm not pitied. I mean, yeah, anyway. So the kids also, were part of the enacted parable. They expressed, the names expressed that God did not have these feelings for his people anymore, because they had abandoned him. They had abandoned him. And yet there was hope expressed. At the end of chapter 1, it says, the people of Judah and the people of Israel will be gathered together. They will appoint for themselves one leader and will flourish in the land. Certainly the day of Jezreel will be great. And into the next chapter, then you will call your brother my people. You will call your sister Pity, Ruhamah. As a side note, again, continuing with my personal story, I became interested in kind of exploring this word and tracing it throughout the scriptures a little bit more when I was in university. One of my classmates in Hebrew class chose, we get to pick a Hebrew name as well as our English name, and we just pretty much used our Hebrew name all throughout. And the class, and one of my classmates chose Ruhamah from this passage. And I recognized where she got her name from, and it was just, now I was studying Hebrew and learning more about it. I kind of explored it and saw that it really has to do with this compassion that God had for his people. As another side note, Ruhamah was actually the mother of one of my high school classmates, which is kind of a weird small world experience when you're at a university with a day school population of 60,000 to end up in a class with the mother of a high school friend, which was interesting. But anyway, her choosing that name sparked me to dig into the word a little bit more. And that started an interest that I actually keep coming back to every now and again. Things kind of redirect me to explore this and think about it a little bit more. So I mentioned the RSV, also the NET and the NASB use pity, which I don't really like that translation. And probably, we'll come back to that. Hold on. Let's take a look at the naming in chapter 1, verse 6. Gomer conceived again and gave birth to a daughter. And then the Lord said to Hosea, call her Lo Ruhamah, which means not loved. For I will no longer show love, Rechem, which is our word again here, to Israel, that I should at all forgive them. Yet I will show love, Rechem, to Judah, and I will save them, not by bow, sword, or battle, but by horses or horsemen, but I, the Lord their God, will save them. And after she had weaned Lo Ruhamah, Gomer had another son, and the Lord said, call him Lo Ami, which means not my people, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. So our focus is on that ruchama, which again was translated pity. In the NIV here, in the newest NIV, they chose to like not really make a decision. They chose to do both, give the Hebrew name, and then kind of give a little translation right afterwards, which means not loved. But it's a little awkward to kind of say, I think what should be more accurate, which is one who has not received compassion. So not loved is a little bit more concise, and they already stretched it out to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words, 6 words. So can't blame them for doing that. But again, this is realize that this underneath here is this word for compassion, to show compassion, or in this case, not have compassion shown to you, because that's the state that Israel was in at the time. And that really is I think a better translation. The pity translation is nice and short, but probably because as a teenager in the 80s, I think my mind was poisoned by pop culture, and pity brings this to mind. Mr. T saying, "I pity the fool." Apologize for that little interjection. But anyhow, so I think it's really about the one who has not received compassion. It's an awkward phrase, yeah, but that's I think more to the point. So we have here, this current state of Israel not receiving compassion, not being God's people anymore, but we also have the picture of hope. So currently, as it stood at this time, not my people. That's just horrible. That's it, and I am not your God. That's really a reversal of the promises to Abraham, a reversal of God's promise to be their God and for them to be his people. It's just tragic. And that would have struck to the heart of these children of Abraham. So Hosea's prophecy continues in chapter 2, because God's compassion returns. There's a call to repentance. Hosea says, plead earnestly with your mother, or God says to, God is saying in this enacted parable, plead earnestly with your mother, for she is not my wife and I am not her husband, so that she may put an end to her adulterous lifestyle and turn away from her sexual immoral behavior. And jumping to verse 14 of chapter 2, however, in the future, I will allure her, I will lead her back into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. So God's expressing his desire to win Israel back through love and compassion and tenderness and kindness, to bring them back from this unfaithfulness that they were currently practicing. And he says in verse 19, I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you in righteousness and justice, in love and compassion. And verse 20, I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will acknowledge the Lord. In verse 19, that compassion word is a related word to our root, rachamim here, and it's really the plural of the word racham, just the same as our verb with just different vowel pointings, and it's often translated tender mercies in the King James, which I like, is a really good a translation of this. In the ESV, you get mercy and compassion only about 9 times. So compassion was just only 4 times in the King James. It's 9 times in the ESV. But again, the dominant meaning is shifting as you get to more modern translations. Compassion and then in the NET is like 25 times, or some flavor of compassion, a little more than half, and close to 3/4 of the NET, the NASB, and the NIV really capture this compassion idea. But it's the plural; it's the compassions of the Lord. It's most often it's in this plural form. And it captures not only the idea of compassion, but it also has an anatomical kind of term. It's like the core, the core of your being. The idea of like the bowels of your core, which is where feelings come from in the Hebrew mindset. So we see that word again in the end of the chapter. Back to the verb again. I will plant for myself, her for myself in the land, and I will the people of Israel, and I will show my love, richem, to the one I called not my loved one, and I will say to those called not my people, you are my people, and they will say, you are my God. So this beautiful prophecy of God's people being restored to their relationship with God. They're repenting, and God welcoming them with compassion and open arms. So I love the story of Hosea. It's just a beautiful enacted parable that speaks of God's love and compassion for his people, despite their unfaithfulness, and God's promise to win them back through speaking tenderly and lovingly to his bride. Peter alludes to this beautiful story when he says in 1 Peter 2, verse 9, you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, so that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. There's another husband-bride image in Isaiah 54, beginning in verse 5, for your maker is your husband, the Lord of hosts is his name, the Holy One of Israel is your Redeemer. For the Lord has called you like a wife deserted and grieved in spirit, like a wife of youth when she is cast off, says your Lord. For a brief moment, I deserted you, but with great compassion, Rachmanim here, Gedolim, the very great compassion, I will gather you in overflowing anger. For a moment, I hid my face from you, but with everlasting love, I will have compassion on you, says the Lord, your Redeemer. This is like the days of Noah to me, as I swore that the waters of Noah should no more go over the earth. So I was sworn that I will not be angry with you and will not rebuke you. For the mountains may depart and the hills may be removed, but my steadfast love shall not depart from you, and my covenant of peace shall not be removed, says the Lord, who has compassion on you. That's actually the context of that verse 10 that we looked at earlier, which speaks of the God who has compassion on you, the one who has compassion on you, almost as a title of God. So to understand this word rachamim a little bit more, the bowels from which feelings flow. We could look back to Genesis, in Genesis 43, in the story of Joseph, when Jacob's sons are about to go back to Egypt because they ran out of grain. Simon was left behind. He's saying, Jacob says, and may God Almighty grant you mercy, rachamim, before the man, so that he will let you and your other older brother Benjamin come back to you. If I am bereaved, as for me, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved. So here they were in this vulnerable situation. Jacob knew they were in a perilous situation. They had this problem of the money. Looks like they stole the money. They have to go back. They're dependent on this man for getting some food to survive. They needed rachamim. They needed mercy. They needed compassion. And then the word shows up again in the same chapter when Joseph is about to reveal himself. It says, deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went into a private room and wept there. It sounds very different, but it's because it's an Hebrew idiom. Idioms are notoriously difficult to translate, but it has the idea. Well, let's look at a few translations and how they try to capture it. The King James goes with a little bit more literal. His bowels did yearn. So the rachamim, referring to the core of his being. The RSV moves it up a little bit to a little bit more modern, where we think of feelings coming from in our language. His heart yearned for his brother. The ESV says his compassion grew warm, capturing the fact that rachamim has this idea of compassion, and NET has overcome by affection. Now, just imagine what it would have been like for Joseph. This has been over a decade, perhaps as long as 2 decades. I mean, we don't know how long he was a slave for Potiphar, after, and how long he was in prison before he meeting the butler and the baker. But after they left the prison, it mentions there was 2 full years, or agonizingly in Hebrew, 2 years of days. He waits, no sign of his request for them to remember him showing any fruit. And then finally Pharaoh's dream comes, and he's restored out of prison. And then, you have the 7 years of plenty, and now we're 2 years into the famine. Think how long it's been since he's seen his brother. And that's why these feelings are so deep for Joseph. The same phrase, this deep feeling that's expressed coming from the core of one's being, the rachamim, is used in another familiar story in 1 Kings chapter 3, when the 2 prostitutes come before Solomon, and it's kind of a test of his wisdom, and he obviously passes it with flying colors, because he said, they both claim, one of them's son had died in the night, in their sleep, and then they started fighting over the baby that remained, and they come before Solomon, and Solomon says, okay, take a knife, sword, and split the child in 2, and everybody gets half, and that'll solve the problem. And the response of the mother, the true mother, is in verse 26. The woman whose son was alive was filled with compassion for her son. And she said to the king, please, my lord, give her the living baby. Don't kill him. But the other said, neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in 2. So very clearly, Solomon could tell who the real mother was, and he said, no, it goes to her. But imagine that feeling. Here's the woman who, remember those feelings that I asked you to think about, either imagining if you're in my shoes or remembering if you were a mother. This mother had this child in her womb. She'd been cradling them, nurturing them, protecting them, and both before and after birth. And now she's about to lose him, because the king is saying, cut him in half. I mean, just her feelings are coming from deep within her, and trying to capture that in different translations. The ESV says, because her heart yearned for her son. Again, not literal. It's bringing more to our experience. We think of our feelings coming from up here, but the King James a little bit more literally says her bowels yearn for her son, like deep down in her core, where in the Hebrew mindset our feelings come from. That's what she was feeling. And this actually brings out an interesting connection. There's another word that uses these same 3 letters of a root, but the vowels have changed a little bit, and it becomes rechem. And rechem is a word which ties into this young mother in 1 Kings 3, because rechem means womb. So you can see the tie-in between compassion and a womb. A mother has this deep compassion for the child who was in their womb, who came from their womb to the world. This is our son Jacob when he was first born, and you can see that. Was it Gabe?
Yes.
Huh?
Leah looks too old for the baby.
Yeah, Leah is too. Okay, all right. Forgive me. I didn't check. They do look. Yeah, they're brothers. They look similar. All right. So, it's not surprising that there's this fascinating connection between the Hebrew concept of compassion, racham, linked to the deep love a mother has for the child in her womb, rechem. So racham, rechem. The deep love that recognizes the helplessness of this child. This child will not survive on their own. And this mother will do anything to protect and nurture this delicate life. So rechem, a beautiful word with a beautiful connection. It's related to the compassion the mother has for her child before and after they leave the womb. And this really expresses the depth of the sense of this word, this word in Hebrew. And it leads to another passage that where God actually compares his compassion to the compassion of a mother's love, and it actually exceeds that compassion. In Isaiah 49, verse 15, it says, "Can a woman forget her nursing child, that she should have no compassion on the son of her womb? Even these may forget, yet I will not forget you. Behold, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. Your walls are continually before me." Is it surprising that God would liken himself to a woman? Well, remember, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Yes, God is labeled with masculine pronouns. He is our Father. But remember the limits of language. Both male and female, according to Genesis 1, are in the image of God, and both carry attributes of God's likeness. So a mother's love and compassion for her child mirrors this attribute of God's glory, this compassion, in a way that the male humans don't quite capture as fully. So the image of God as this mother who loves her child just with unending compassion. The context of that passage also has the word compassion a number of times. There are verb that we were looking at a couple verses before. They will neither not hunger or thirst, nor will the scorching heat or sun strike them down. For he who has compassion on them will lead them, and he will guide them to springs of water. Shout for joy, you heavens, and rejoice, you earth. Break forth into shouting, mountains. For the Lord has comforted his people and will have compassion on his afflicted. So that leads us to the idea of reflecting God's character. If God is, one of the most important attributes of God is his compassion, then we should be reflecting that as well as people in the image of God. The Talmudic rabbis considered compassion to be one of the three distinguishing marks of the Jewish people. So that's how important they saw it, as people having to reflect this attribute of God, this characteristic of God. Another quote, in Jewish teaching, compassion is among the highest of virtues, as is its opposite, cruelty, among the worst of vices. So keeping all that in mind, is it any surprise that Jesus embodied compassion? We see so many passages, here's just a few of them. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. God called the disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They've already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. I do not want to send them away hungry, or they may collapse on the way. Jesus, the Son of the Father, who bore the image of his Father more completely than anybody else, obviously demonstrated compassion. Should not be surprising. And it shouldn't be surprising that he taught compassion as well. Luke 6:36, we're familiar with it as be ye merciful as your Father is merciful, but consider the Revised English Bible. Be compassionate as your Father is compassionate. And justification for that translation is oktirmon. The Greek word there is in the Septuagint is the most often used word to translate rachamim, the compassions of the Lord. The modern Hebrew New Testament in this passage translates using the word rachamim, compassion as well. So, mercy, captures part of it, but I think Jesus is calling us to compassion as well. Be compassionate as your Father is compassionate. That first attribute of God should be an attribute of our character as well. Jesus had a number of lessons on compassion. He not only demonstrated it in his life, he taught us about it with these beautiful word pictures like this one. But while he was still a long way off, his Father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. And he ran to his son and threw his arms around him and kissed him. Jesus paints this moving picture of God's deep yearning for a lost son to return, for us to return to him when we've strayed. And in this lesson, Jesus has the lesson of the older brother for us to remember when we see our brother return and repent. We should be sharing in the joy of the Father who has this compassion and love for a son and is willing to overlook what the son had done because he is turned away from that life and is returning to his Father. Another powerful lesson. Hold on. Jesus paints forgive me that. Another powerful lesson in this picture, but a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him. He cared for his needs. The Samaritan, he personally sacrificed time and money to help one in need. And really, this is a picture of Jesus, what he has done for us. Jesus, the Good Samaritan, has saved us when we were as good as dead, and has shown mercy and kindness and love and compassion and bound up our wounds and brought us to an inn, the ecclesia, where he asks our brethren, like the Samaritan asked the innkeeper to care for this injured person. Jesus asks our brethren to care for us until he returns. And he asks us to care for others who come into the house, the inn, to care for them until he returns. He asks us to have compassion like that Samaritan did. And another lesson on compassion, the servant's master took pity, or the King James, moved with compassion on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. You know the parable, the servant who owed 10,000 talents, millions of dollars in today's money. If a day's wage or a year's wage is like, say, $40,000, that'd be $400 million. Even if it was, a year's wage, minimum wage is 25,000 or something like that. We're talking $2,500 million, $250 million. Anyway, crazy amount of money. That's the debt that this man forgave, that the ruler forgave the servant. And Jesus taught us to recognize that is a picture of our debt to God. God has shown us incredible compassion. And so we need to turn and show it to others. And so many passages teach. So that's Jesus teaching. But throughout the scriptures, God is teaching us to have that kind of compassion for one another and for those in need. So many passages teach of God's care and concern for the vulnerable of society, the stranger, the poor, the widow, the orphan. one beautiful verse at the end of Hosea, we looked at Hosea, expresses God's compassion for the orphan. For in you, in God, the fatherless find compassion. In the law, we have God caring for the sojourner, the fatherless, the widow, by telling the Israelites that they were supposed to leave the gleanings of their field, so that these people who are in need could go through and pick up the stray pieces of grain and the stray olives on the vine, grapes on the vine, so that they could be sustained. God had a heart for these people. Compassion, one thing I heard said about compassion is it's recognizing suffering and then taking action to help. I've also heard it said the opposite of love is indifference. Compassion is the opposite of indifference. It's seeing a need and having a heart for that need and doing something about it. And we do, there's in the Brotherhood, there are so many examples in our community of how people have showed compassion. I can just think of a few examples. I don't know how many of you know about Brother Alan Overton, who's kind of called the Schindler of rugby, England, was a Christadelphian brother who helped hundreds of evacuees from Nazi Germany have a place, a home, and refuge from the certain death that they would have faced in Hitler's Germany. Hundreds of children taken in by believers, many with great sacrifice. If you haven't heard or read Brother Jason Hensley's book on the Kindertransport or heard some of his interviews online, look it up. Do it. It's really, really, really inspiring. And the article mentions that it just touched his heart when Brother Alan saw the plight of these children who were facing certain death. It touched his heart. That's compassion. Another way that I see in the Brotherhood compassion coming out in Christadelphian charities like Mila Day and Agape in Action. We were in Kenya and saw the powerful things that are being done with the support of people from this country and elsewhere in the Brotherhood, the nutrition drink program, the care for the widows and the widows program. So as a Brotherhood, there are things that we are doing well that are demonstrating compassion. And I want to think about both the positives and the negatives. If we close out the class, some discussion questions. Can you thinking about our ecclesia, some positives, and in our region, prayer requests, I think are a great example of compassion, recognizing the needs and having a heart for the needs of our brothers and sisters. The welcome that the Stoughton Ecclesia has given to refugees, and the care and support they've given to people who are strangers in a strange land. As somebody who was a stranger in a strange land, but without the added burden of being a refugee who's fleeing for his life from his homeland, but just being a stranger and being in a country that's not my own, where my language is not the dominant language being spoken, I can appreciate just how powerful that is to have that kind of love and support of brethren. I depended on it when I was in another country. The support in our ecclesia for Agape in Action. Actually, I think back on my first experience at Stoughton, my very first visit was when you invited Brother James and Sister Deb Flint to come and speak about Agape in Action. It was wonderful. I saw the love and support of our brethren in Stoughton, and it stuck in my heart and in my mind. In our, a little bit more extended community in New England, the Swahili program at Eastern Christadelphian Bible School, I recognize that people in the community had it in their heart that we need to recognize the needs of our brothers that are in a different culture and really could benefit from having sometimes a little bit more critical mass of brothers and sisters who share language and culture for a time, having that fellowship, as well as the fellowship of the Native Americans, not Native Americans, but people who grew up in America. That was a wonderful experience, and I'm so glad to hear that we're doing it again this year at Eastern. I don't know. So discussion. Can you think of other positive things that you see, you can think of in our body in New England and in Stoughton that show compassion? Anybody have anything to share?